11. In the middle of July, the elder from the village belonging to Levin's sister, which lay 15 miles from Pokrovsk, came to see Levin and report on business matters and on the hay harvest. The chief income from his sister's estate was derived from the meadows, which were flooded every spring. In former years, the peasants used to buy the grass, paying 7 rubles per acre for it. When Levin took over the management of the estate, he looked into the matter, and, concluding that the grass was worth more, fixed the price at 8 rubles. The peasants would not pay so much, and Levin suspected them of keeping other buyers off. Then he went there himself, and arranged to have the harvest gathered in, partly by hired labourers, and partly by peasants paid in kind. The local men opposed this innovation by all the means in their power, but the plan succeeded, and in the first year the meadows brought in almost double. The next and third years the peasants still held out, and the harvest was got in by the same means. But this year the peasants had agreed to get the harvest in and take 1/3 of all the hay in payment. Now the elder had come to inform Levin that the hay was all made, and that for fear of rain he had asked the steward to come, and in his presence had apportioned the hay, and had already stacked 11 stacks of the landlord's share. From the elder's vague replies to Levin's questions as to how much hay the largest meadow had yielded, from his haste to apportion the hay without waiting for permission, and from the general tone of the peasant, Levin knew that there was something not quite square about the apportionment, and decided to go and investigate the matter himself. Levin arrived at his sister's village at noon, and left his horse with a friendly old peasant, the husband of his brother's nurse. Wishing to hear particulars of the hay harvest from this old man, Levin went to speak to him in his apiary. Parmenich, a loquacious, handsome old man, welcomed Levin joyfully, showed him over his homestead, and told him all about the swarming of his bees that year. But to Levin's questions about the hay harvest, he gave vague and reluctant answers. This still further confirmed Levin's suspicions. He went to inspect the hay, examined the stacks, and saw that there could not be 50 cartloads in each. To put the peasant to the proof, Levin ordered the carts on which the hay was being moved to be fetched, and one of the stacks to be carried to the barn. There were only 32 loads in the stack. In spite of the elder's explanations that the hay had been loose, but had settled down in the stacks, and his swearing that all had been done in a godly way, Levin insisted that the hay had been apportioned without his order, and that he would not accept the stacks as containing 50 loads each. After lengthy disputes, it was settled that the peasants themselves should take those 11 stacks, counting them as 50 loads each, and that the owner's share should be measured afresh. These disputes and the apportioning of the haycocks went on till it was time for the evening meal. When the last of the hay had been apportioned, Levin entrusted the rest of the supervision to the steward, and seated himself on a haycock marked with a willow branch, looking with enjoyment at the meadow teeming with busy people. Before him, within the bend of the river, beyond a marsh, moved a line of gaily clad women, merrily chattering in their ringing voices, while the scattered hay was quickly forming into grey waving ridges on the light green meadow. Men with hay forks followed the women, and the ridges grew into tall, wide and light haycocks. To the left, carts rattled along the bare meadow, and one after another the haycocks vanished, picked up in enormous forkfuls, and their places were taken by heavy carts with their huge loads of scented hay overhanging the horses' backs. "Make hay while the sun shines, and you'll have plenty," remarked the old beekeeper, sitting down beside Levin. "It's more like tea than hay. See them picking it up, like ducklings picking up the food you have thrown to them," he added, pointing to where the hay was being loaded on the carts. "They've carted a good half since dinner time." "Is that the last?" he shouted to a lad who was driving past, standing on the front of a cart and flicking the ends of his hempen reins. "The last one, father," shouted the lad, reining in the horse and smilingly turning to a rosy young woman, who, also smiling, sat inside the cart. Then he drove on again. "Who's that? Your son?" asked Levin. "My youngest," replied the old man with a smile of affection. "A fine fella." "Not a bad lad." "And already married?" "Yes, just over 2 years." "Have they any children?" "Children? All the first year he didn't understand anything, and we chaffed him," answered the old man. "Well, this is hay. Regular tea," said he again, in order to change the subject. Levin looked more attentively at Vanka Parmenich and his wife. They were loading their cart not far away. Vanka stood inside the cart, patting and stamping down evenly in the cart the enormous bales of hay which his young wife first passed him in armfuls and then pitched up on the fork. The young woman was working with ease, cheerfulness and skill. The fork could not at once penetrate the broad-bladed compressed hay, so she first loosened it with the prongs, then with a quick and springy movement, putting all the weight of her body on the fork, quickly straightened her red-girdled figure and stood erect, her full bosom thrown forward beneath the pinafore, and turning the fork dexterously, she pitched the hay high up into the cart. Vanka, with an evident desire to save her every moment of unnecessary exertion, hurriedly caught the hay in his outspread arms and smoothed it evenly in the cart. When she had lifted the remaining hay to him with a rake, she shook the chaff from her neck, straightened the kerchief that had slipped from her forehead, which showed white where the sun had not reached it, and crawled under the cart to help rope up. Vanka showed her how to do this, and burst out laughing at something she said. Strong, young, newly awakened love shone in both their faces. 12. The hay was roped. Vanka jumped down and, taking the bridle, led away the good, well-fed horse. His wife threw her rake on top of the load, and swinging her arms, went with vigorous steps to join the other women who had gathered in a circle. Having come out upon the road, Vanka took his place in the line of carts. The women, carrying their rakes over their shoulders, followed the carts, their coloured dresses gleaming brightly and their chatter ringing merrily. One of the women, with a strange gruff voice, started a song and sang it to the end, when 50 powerful voices, some gruff and others shrill, all at once took it up with a will. The singing women were drawing nearer to Levin, and he felt as if a thundercloud of merriment were approaching. The cloud moved past, enveloping him and the haycock upon which he sat, and the other haycocks, the carts, the whole of the meadow, and the distant fields. They all seemed to vibrate and heave with the strains of that wild, madly merry song, interspersed with screams and whistling. Levin envied them their healthy gaiety, and felt a wish to take part in that expression of the joy of living. But he could do nothing, except lie, and look, and listen. When the company and their songs vanished out of sight and hearing, an oppressive feeling of discontent with his own lonely lot, his physical idleness and his hostility to the world overcame Levin. Some of those very peasants who had disputed with him about the hay, whom either he had wronged or had tried to cheat him, those very peasants had bowed pleasantly to him, evidently not harbouring, and unable to harbour, any ill will toward him, being not only unrepentant, but even forgetful that they had been trying to cheat him. All had been drowned in the sea of their joyful common toil. God had given them the day and the strength, and both the day and the strength had been devoted to labour, which had brought its own reward. For whom they had laboured, and what the fruit of their labour would be, was an extraneous and unimportant affair. Levin had often admired that kind of life, had often envied the folk who lived it. But that day, especially after what he had seen for the first time of the relations between Vanka Parmenich and his young wife, it struck him that it depended on himself to change his wearisome, idle, and artificial personal life for that pure, delightful life of common toil. The old man who had been sitting beside him had long since gone home. The peasants who lived nearby had also gone home, and those from a distance had gathered together to have supper and spend the night in the meadow. Levin, unnoticed by them, still lay on the haycock, looking, listening and thinking. The peasants who were staying in the meadow kept awake almost all the short summer night. At first the sounds of merry general talk and shouts of laughter over their supper could be heard, then songs and more laughter. The whole long day of toil had left upon them no trace of anything but merriment. Just before dawn, all became silent. The sounds of night, the ceaseless croaking of frogs, the snorting of horses through the morning mist over the meadow, could alone be heard. Awaking to reality, Levin rose from his haycock, and glancing up at the stars, realized that the night was nearly over. Well then, what shall I do? How shall I do it? He asked himself, trying to find expression for what he had been thinking, and the feelings he had lived through in that short night. All his ideas and feelings separated themselves into 3 different lines of thought. The first was how to renounce his old life and discard his quite useless education. This renunciation would afford him pleasure, and was quite easy and simple. The second was concerned with his notion of the life he now wished to lead. He was distinctly conscious of the simplicity, purity, and rightness of that life, and was convinced that in it he would find satisfaction, peace, and dignity, the absence of which was so painful to him. But the third thought was the question of how to make the change from his present life to that other one. And here no clear idea presented itself to his mind. Should he have a wife? Should he have work and the necessity to work? Should he leave Pokrovsk, buy land, join a peasant commune, marry a peasant girl? How am I to do it? He again asked himself, and could find no reply. However, I have not slept all night, and can't render a clear account of myself now, he thought, but I'll clear it up later. One thing is certain. This night has decided my fate. All my former dreams of a family life were nonsense, not the right thing. Everything is much simpler and better than that. How beautiful, he thought, looking up at a strange mother-of-pearl coloured shell formed of fleecy clouds in the centre of the sky just over his head. How lovely everything is, this lovely night, and how did this shell get formed so quickly? A little while ago when I looked at the sky all was clear, but for 2 white stripes. My views of life have changed in just the same unnoticeable way. Leaving the meadow, he went down the high road toward the village. A slight breeze was blowing, and all looked grey and dull. There is generally a period of gloom just before daybreak, and a complete triumph of light over darkness. Shivering with cold, Levin walked rapidly with his eyes fixed on the ground. What's that? Who can it be coming? Thought he, hearing the tinkling of bells and raising his head. At a distance of 40 paces, along the road on which he was walking, he saw a coach with 4 horses, and luggage on top approaching him. The horses were pressing close together away from the ruts, but the skillful driver, sitting sideways on the box, guided them so that the coach wheels ran smoothly in the ruts. That was all Levin noticed, and without wondering who might be inside, he glanced in at the window absent-mindedly. In one corner, an elderly woman was dozing, and close to the window sat a young girl who had just wakened and was holding the ribbons of her white nightcap with both hands. Bright and thoughtful, full of that complicated refinement of a life to which Levin was a stranger, she looked across him at the glow of dawn. At the very moment when this vision was about to disappear, her candid eyes fell on him. She recognized him, and joyful surprise lit up her face. He could not be mistaken. There were no other eyes in the world like them. In the whole world, there was only one being able to unite in itself the universe and the meaning of life for him. It was Kitty. He guessed that she was on her way from the station to her sister's house at Ergushevo. All that had so disturbed Levin during the sleepless night, and all his resolutions, vanished suddenly. He recalled with disgust his thoughts of marrying a peasant girl. There alone, inside that coach on the other side of the road, so rapidly receding from him, was the one possible solution of that riddle which had been weighing on him so painfully of late. She did not look out again. The sound of the wheels could no longer be heard. The tinkling of the bells grew fainter. The barking of dogs proved that the coach was passing through the village, and only the empty fields, the village before him, and he himself, walking solitary on the deserted road, were left. He looked up at the sky, hoping to find there the shell he had been admiring, which had typified for him the reflections and feelings of the night. There in the unfathomable height, a mystic change was going on, and he could see no sign of anything like a shell, but a large cover of gradually diminishing fleecy cloudlets was spreading over half the sky, which had turned blue and grown brighter. It answered his questioning look with the same tenderness and the same remoteness. No, said he to himself, beautiful as is that life of simplicity and toil, I cannot turn to it. I love her.